Thanks, James. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you, Gary. And this has got. I'm quite fascinated with the Native American traditions and cultures, and I'm also fascinated with archaeoastronomy, Gary. So
Mm.
I've got it all wrapped up in one today. And I've also had Nancy Redstar from Ancient Aliens on as well. So
Mm.
we did one show there not too long ago. But so this is fascinating subject, Gary. How did you get, I guess, drawn into this, suckered into this, or?
Yeah, we have to go back quite a ways, maybe more than I'd like to admit, but maybe 25 years before I lived in Arizona, I lived in South Dakota. And I was working with the Lakota Sioux, and I met a woman named Charlotte Black Elk. And Charlotte was the great granddaughter of the famous Nicholas Black Elk, who wrote Black Elk Speaks, a Native American classic. And at the time, she was talking about this star map that she had on a buffalo hide. And she was relating it to various points in the Black Hills. The Black Hills are the kind of the center of the Lakota Sioux world or cosmology. And she said that various stars, various constellations corresponded to certain spots in the Black Hills. And the Lakota used to make annual migrations around the Black Hills and performing a specific ceremony at each spot in the during the year, and at each very specific spots and specific times that these rituals were performed, and they all corresponded to celestial objects, Orion's belt, Sirius, the Pleiades. They all had correspondence in uh, spots in the Black Hills. So this idea of as above, so below was very obvious in the Lakota cosmology, and this is the first time I had come across this idea that the Earth, or the conception of a cosmology on the Earth, would mirror the stars. So it got me thinking about this heaven's mirror, or the reflection of these spots on the Earth and in the heavens, on Earth as is in heaven. Is
As above, so below, as they say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And so when I got to Arizona, I've lived in Arizona for over 18 years. And I started going to some of these kachina dances. The kachinas are messenger spirits. They're intermediaries between the realm of the humans and the realm of the gods. And the Hopi still have these kachina dances every year. They're kind of winding up for the season right now. They're having the last of the dances in July, and then they'll they'll ease off, and the Kachinas will go back to their home, which is the San Francisco Peaks, and wait until after the winter solstice, and then the Kachinas will come back to the Hopi Mesas.
Major
And,
part of their culture, this, Gary, isn't it?
oh yeah, yeah, it's the Kachinas have been with them for thousands of years. And if you've seen Kachina dolls, some of your listeners might be familiar with the Kachina dolls that the Hopi carve. Originally, these were carved not to sell to tourists, which they do today, but to instruct the children about all these various spirits that come to them, because there are so many different types of kachinas. And the some of the it's a mask dance that they perform in the village plaza usually, and they dance for hours and hours in the hot sun. And
Strange
these
masks as well, Gary,
Oh
aren't they?
yeah, yeah. It's hard to describe because they're so varied, the types of masks. Some of them even look like space helmets.
It kind of
Uh,
reminds me of the Dogon sometimes and their strange masks. That
oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of similarities between the Dogon and the Hopi, and it's quite amazing, these mass dances that both of these tribes or groups, ethnic groups, perform.
mm.
And they're obviously spirits that help the Hopi. These Kachinas are benevolent spirits, and they help with the agricultural cycle. They come right after the winter solstice and stay through the sowing season and into they stay through July, as I said, and then they go back to the San Francisco Peaks, which are the highest mountains in Arizona, and they stay there for the rest of the year until the cycle renews itself, and they go back to help the Hopi.
So it's not even
But
just a celebration of summer solstice, winter solstice, or solstitial events. It's actually a migratory route as well.
oh yeah, it's a cyclic migration of these spirits
Mm.
that come and help them for a while on the mesas. But the mesas are about 60, 75 miles to the northeast of the San Francisco Peaks.
Hmm.
I started going when I first came here into Arizona. I started going to these kachina dances, and they're so powerful because the Hopi live in these adobe villages, these stone and mud villages, and they've been in this region for well over 1,000 years. The oldest continuously inhabited community
Wow.
in the U.S. It was established about 1100 A.D.
Do you ever wonder, Gary, how far they go back? Do you think they go back to like 3000 BC, but we only have record of the last 1000?
Well, the Hopi made a number of migrations through the years, and before they came to this center place, which they're located now in Arizona, in northern Arizona, they made these tremendous migrations. And some believe that they went down into the Maya territory
Mm.
in the Yucatan, and and there are tales of them going east to the Atlantic Ocean, and some of the myths involve the Snake Clan, which supposedly constructed Serpent Mound in southern Ohio. And they went up into Canada, into the far north, and they found Snake Clan petroglyphs in Alberta, Canada. So these people, before they established themselves on these three primary mesas in Arizona, they made this centuries long period of migrations and kind of circumambulating this across the continent. And and then they finally came to the center point, the axis mundi, or the center of the world, the center of the Hopi cosmology, and that's where they settled, and they're still there after over 1,000 years.
So, Gary, let's talk about Orion because these star shrines are in the shape of Orion. And you mentioned Robert Bauval. I have Robert Bauval coming on this Saturday, so it's
Oh,
quite.
great.
Yes,
No.
I've been looking for getting Robert on for a while now, so I'm looking forward to that. And of course, many people will be familiar with Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory with the Giza pyramids. So, but here we have again, Gary, that you seem to have mapped out here that this Orion, as above, so below, is mapped out again. Perhaps maybe explain that, Gary.
Sure. Yeah, Robert Duvall's work was instrumental in my theory of the Arizona Orion correlation. And as I said, I was going up to one of these Kachina dances, and I was driving toward the Hopi Mesas, and I had just read Robert Duvall's book, The Orion Mystery, which correlates the three major pyramids on the Giza Plateau to the belt stars of Orion. And there are three primary mesas on that the Hopi live on, first, second, and third mesa. And I was just kind of idly gazing off into the distance as I approached them. I thought, well, maybe there's an Orion correlation right here in Arizona. And I put that in the back of my mind and went to see the dances and experienced the dances. And then when I got home, I got out a map of Arizona and I got out a star chart. And I realized there was a direct correlation between the villages that the Hopi had constructed and every major star in the constellation Orion. And the reflection of the celestial onto the earth was almost perfect. There was a perfect match between the stars of Orion and the pattern of villages on the Arizona desert. And this just really, just floored me. It just blew me away, so to speak. And I started, going to these various sites and researching the sites. And that was back in 1997, and I've been going ever since with this theory. And each one of my books kind of builds on the other and presents different aspects of this basic correlation between the stars and the villages, the Hopi villages of.
Sure. Have you ever heard of Thornborough Henge in the UK, Gary?
Oh, sure, yeah.
It kind of synchronizes with that in my mind
Yeah, in fact, right now I'm working on an ebook that kind of looks at all the Orion correlations that I could find on the globe, and one of these is Thornborough, which happens to be on the same meridian as Avebury and Silbury Hill and Stonehenge. If you look, it's the same longitude line that all these sites are located. Lindisfarne is on that line as well. And
yeah, there's so many across the world, Gary, isn't there?
yeah, there's one in Mexico, Teotihuacan, in north of Mexico City, which is a pretty direct correlation to Orion's belt. And I found an Orion correlation in Nigeria, believe it or not. And there's some in South Africa, some Orion correlations in South Africa. And they're basically all over the planet. And ancient cultures seem to have focused on this particular constellation, as well as Sirius and the Pleiades. Sirius was also an important star for the Hopi. The Hopi call Sirius Ponatsona, which means sucks from the belly, which indicates a mammal of some sort. It's not a dog as we think of the dog star, but it is a mammal that the Hopi are talking about, and relating this particular star to some sort of mammal, maybe an antelope, or perhaps it is a dog.
Just for the listeners, Gary, we have the Orion's belt, the three stars of Orion's belt, and if you follow the line upwards, you will hit the Pleiades, and if you follow that angle downwards, you will hit the Sirius, which they call the dog star, because it follows.
Sure, yeah, they're a direct line, and in the course of my research, I extended this Orion correlation to adjacent constellations. And it seems that, the largest ruin site in the American Southwest is called Chaco Canyon. And there are, a number of ruins, about a dozen different ruins in this canyon. And they're huge complexes. And this site corresponds to the star Sirius, the brightest star in the heavens, corresponds to the largest set of ruins in the Southwest.
And there's the rock art there as well. There's Chaco Canyon rock art, isn't there?
Sure, yeah, there's rock art. Well, basically all over the Southwest, but there's rock art been found in Chaco Canyon that corresponds. One of the famous ones is a rock painting or pictograph that depicts the 1054 supernova explosion.
Yeah,
happened in 1054 A.D. And the Chinese recorded the same supernova explosion, and it's found in Chaco Canyon. So the ancient Hopi, and they call themselves the Hizatsinom, which simply means ancient people. Scientists used to call them Anasazi, like back in the 1970s. The Anasazi was a kind of a romantic term, but actually the Anasazi means ancient enemy, and it's a Navajo word. The Navajo also live in the American Southwest, and currently the Navajo reservation surrounds the Hopi reservation, and it's much larger. And the Navajo are more recent in coming to this region, but the Hopi didn't like being called their ancestors being called ancient enemies. So they kind of insisted on the term or old ones or
I'm
the
glad you
ancient ones.
corrected me on that, Gary, because I had been using the term Anasazi, and us in the, well, especially over in the UK and Ireland, we wouldn't know any different. We just heard the name getting bandied about, and
Sure, yeah, well, it's a kind of a nice sounding word, and it sounds rather romantic, but and this was a term that was, as I said, used by a lot of archaeologists back in the 70s, but it fell out of favor. Now the archaeologists name them something like the ancestral Puebloans, which is not quite, it has the pizzazz of the Anasazi.
Mhm. Beautiful, and well, you talk about the Pueblo people. Then give us an idea of these guys as in human terms today, Gary, because you're more familiar with them than we are over here. And just in terms of what these guys get up to, what their culture is today, setting aside from the history of the monuments and stuff.
Well, sure. The Hopi are basically farmers. They grow corn, beans, and squash, and that's the traditional dietary triad. And the corn came up from Mexico thousands of years ago. The knowledge of corn growth, and the Hopi live in these stone apartment buildings, you might call them. They're called pueblos, and there are a number of villages. There are about a dozen villages spread out across these three primary mesas. And each village has a specific elder or group of elders that pass on the various traditions. And, the Hopi are not exactly monolithic as a tribe. There are variances in the different myths that each village has. So that's why it's hard to talk about the Hopi as a group, because each village has a slightly different tradition that they abide by, and but there are also a couple different types of dialects on the Hopi reservation. So it's not the unified group of people that people like to talk about the Hopi, the quote unquote Hopi. There are a number of villages that comprise the Hopi as a people.
We tend to think of Western thoughts when looking at other cultures. Like we try to break everybody into a nation or a flag or a identity, or
Sure, yeah. Well, it's
but
the
it's a,
easy way to think about it, but the Hopi are very complex people. I've never run into quite the complexity of ritual and cosmology as a Hopi. Like I said, I studied the Lakota, Sioux, and South Dakota, and they have an amazing cosmology in their own right. But the Hopi, the complexities of different clans and different groups of clans, and how they interrelate, and the cycle of the rituals throughout the year. It's just it's almost overwhelming how complex it really is. And I'm sure that I don't have a very good grasp of it. I'm just scratching the surface as a non-Hopi. Yeah, it's unless you're in that culture and grew up with it, it's very hard
well, should I
to.
just say for the listeners, Gary, you do have a bachelor's degree in arts, because I didn't get into your academic background. But you do have a
Well,
bachelor.
yeah, I have a master's degree in English literature and literature of the American West, and and as I said, I taught on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and familiar with Native Americans in general throughout my adult life. So, the Hopi, I've been around for almost over 18 years here in Arizona, and studied them and interacted with them and watched some of the rituals. So
In,
it's
sure. In the book,
yeah.
Gary, in your book, Star Shrines and Earthworks, you mention, and this is because I actually have a first edition of this. I couldn't get any other edition than the first edition, but I got a copy of Hamlet's Mill because so many authors referred to this book about by the Santayana and Von Deckend when they wrote this book. It's like the Archaeo astronomer's Bible, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. It's an amazing work, and you really have to, it's a really diligent kind of study of how ancient mythology really encodes celestial knowledge and the idea of the precession of the equinoxes and how the different worlds come and go. And that's one of the major things about the Hopi. They have this idea of cyclic time, much like the Maya, and that they have basically four different worlds have come. We're in the fourth world right now, according to the Hopi. At the very end of the fourth world, in fact, and we can get into some of the prophecy and aspect,
Oh
and
yeah, I'd love to do that. I mean, please tell us some of the prophecies.
that's another really interesting facet of the Hopi people because I have to say that the Hopi are kind of like they have a legacy of prophecy. I mean, it goes way back, and they have prophets that have predicted certain events in the future, and this is part of the culture. And since the middle of
The Blue Star
middle,
is the one that stands out for me, Gary. The Blue Star prophecy.
oh yeah, the blue star is will appear in the sky at the end of the fourth world, which is kind of a warning that the age is coming to a close,
Hmm.
and a lot of people have different ideas of what the blue star may be, or it might have been the Hale-Bopp comet back in 1997.
I kind of favor that one, Gary.
Well, you look at the pictures of the Hale-Bopp, and I was out looking at it myself here in Arizona, and it's definitely blue. You could see it in the sky in the oh yeah, in the evening, and it had a long tail, long blue tail. And then, in fact, a lot of people were out looking at the Hale-Bopp comet when the Phoenix lights appeared. And that's a whole other realm of Hopi thinking. The Hopi believe that at the end of the fourth world,
You wouldn't be far
these
from the Phoenix Lights then, Gary.
well, in fact, the Phoenix Lights, I was very unfortunate in the fact that I went inside just before the Phoenix Lights flew over my town. Uh, yeah, yeah. It was first sighted in around a little south of Las Vegas, in Henderson, Nevada. And then a next reported sighting was like 5 miles north of me. And then another sighting was my town, Chino Valley, Arizona. And it worked its way south towards Phoenix. And that's, where a lot of the people, thousands of people saw this triangular craft. And it was supposedly like a mile across. And some of my neighbors saw it, and they thought, this is amazing. It's just a huge thing that kind of drifted across the sky. And unfortunately, I'd just gone inside and missed the whole show.
You weren't meant to see it, Gary, were you?
Bad luck seeing UFOs. But this is another facet of Hopi culture, along with prophecy. They have the idea that the Kachinas come in these flying craft. They call them pa tuvota, or flying shields. And traditionally, this was part of the culture that the Kachina would come in these craft and interact with the people. And sometimes the Kachinas even took Hopi brides. So this is it kind of mirrors the abduction phenomenon, the modern abduction phenomenon, quite well.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of star ancestral knowledge encoded into the Native American traditions. I know that. It seems to come to light. And I think they've been quite protective of this for a long time, but they seem to be releasing this knowledge now, Gary.
Yeah, I think especially since the mid 20th century, some of these prophecies that the elders had predicted were starting to come true in during World War II, the ending of World War II, the dropping of the atom bomb. The Hopi had predicted that years before, and they called it a gourd of ashes would fall on the earth very soon. And when this happened, a group of elders, especially in a village called Haute-Villa on the Third Mesa, began to release some of these Hopi prophecies. Before that time, the prophecies were secret and really not known to the world. And after World War II, and they confirmed that one of their prophecies, one of their main prophecies, had come true. That they thought that they should release some of the other prophecies. And there are a number of different prophecies according to the different elders. But it was starting to come to pass, these things, and they thought that the end of the Fourth World was coming to a close. And one of the signs, of course, as we mentioned, was the blue star, the warning sign.
Sure. And here's the thing: if a comet's periodic like Hale-Bopp, and they could turn around and say, well, when this is near enough around the time when consciousness arises and falls, or we kind of descend into chaos and come back out of it into a new world age, and it would be a good marker, though, wouldn't it, Gary, to have like a periodic comet, because that would literally be some sort of physical event to initiate the prophecies.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah. And a lot of people think the comet Ison coming up at the end of this year might be that blue star. As you said, I like the idea of Hale-Bopp being.
Me too.
But we'll see. We'll have to see what this comet Ison, the comet of the century, supposedly, if it pans out to be.
Wow, comet of the century.
Yeah, that's what they say. That this will be. You'll be able to see it during the day.
Wow. So we've already had Halley's Comet and Hale-Bopp, so we're gonna have the daddy come home now.
Yeah, I think so. The Hopi, kind of have a philosophical view of things. They've gone through the destruction of three different worlds. The first world by fire, the second world by ice, and the third world was a great flood. So,
it's the flood myth again, Gary. The flood myth seems to come up with these cultures that are linked with Orion and the Pleiades. And
oh, sure, yeah. The flood myth is universal. A lot of Native Americans have flood myths where you wouldn't think. The Hopi are an inland tribe of farmers, and they have this idea of a great flood. And so one version of the myth is that they came across the Pacific Ocean on reed rafts, and they came to the west coast of North America, and they came up through the Gulf of California, and they paddled up the Colorado River, and they emerged around the area of Grand Canyon. And this is one of the myths, a trans-Pacific migration from, somewhere in the South Pacific, escaping a great flood. And yeah, I talk about this in my most recent book. There are some clues from James Churchward. He talks about the continent of Mu, and he discusses the Anasazi in particular. He calls them the cliff dwellers. They were the last wave to leave this sinking continent of Mu, and they came to the American Southwest. And Churchward also came to New Mexico and Arizona, and he compared some of the symbols of Mu that he had found and with the rock art in the American Southwest. And he said that the symbols were virtually identical. Okay. Yeah. So that's one of the confirmations of this Hopi myth. And you wouldn't expect, farmers, desert farmers, to have this myth of, sailing across the Pacific, but indeed they do.
Sure. You mentioned the Grand Canyon there. You got to tell us about the Grand Canyon Cave Enigma. I think this is beautiful and fascinating. This really appeals to me in the mystery sense.
Oh yeah, a lot of people are fascinated with this story. It's been called the Lost City of the Dead in Grand Canyon. It's also been called Kincaid's Cave. There was a man named G.E. Kincaid, and he was originally from Idaho, and he was working for the Smithsonian Institute. And this was in 1908 and 1909. And there was an article that appeared in the April 5th, 1909 edition of the Arizona Gazette, which was Phoenix daily newspaper at the time. And this was a front page article that talked about this man, Kincaid, going down from Green River, Wyoming, and starting off in October of 1908 and sailing down the Colorado River in a boat. He was, as I said, working for the Smithsonian, but he was also, of course, looking for gold along the way and prospecting. But he came to an area in Grand Canyon, which, well, it's called Marble Canyon, really, in the place where he found this cave.
Mm-hmm.
It's just north of the place where the Little Colorado River flows into the main Colorado River. And he saw this cave on the side of the cliff, and it was very high up. It was about 2,000 feet above the river, and it was about 1,500 feet below the rim of the canyon. So it was way up there on the side of the cliff. And he said that he got to the entrance of this cave, and he made it with great difficulty, which I think is probably an understatement. It's just an amazing climb that he would have to have taken to get to this cave. But this article talks about the cave opening was a kind of a rectangular carved opening, and it was about 12 feet wide, and a tunnel went into the side of the cliff horizontally. And this tunnel went back hundreds and hundreds of feet. And there were side passageways. And amazingly enough, he found that there were oval-shaped doors in this cave, obviously carved. And there were ventilation shafts. So there was a whole ventilation system in this complex. And there was a couple different huge rooms, and there were passageways going off from one of these huge chambers, like he said, like spokes on a wheel. So this, just amazing, huge complex in this tunnel that he discovered.
And
And
that's a no-go area today. Is that right, Gary?
yeah, you have to, you're not allowed to hike that area of the Grand Canyon. It's off limits. So for some reason, the national park system doesn't want you to go there. And there are a lot of theories about what happened to the artifacts that were supposedly found. These artifacts were just amazing, James. Some of these artifacts were like gold cups and urns and bases and copper weapons. And there was like a smelting operation because they found slag there. He found and pottery. They found pottery and stone tablets with some sort of hieroglyphic writing on these tablets, and granaries, and like a huge dining hall was found there. And also, one of the most interesting artifacts was apparently a marble statue, a carved marble statue of Buddha sitting in a lotus posture, holding a lotus in each hand. Like a life-size Buddha statue. In another room, they found it's called the crypt. They found a number of male mummies lying on these carved rock shelves. And, there were like broken swords by their side. Maybe they were warriors or something like that. But the article stated that there were like several hundred rooms in this whole complex. And I find this hard to believe, but they said, this complex could hold up to 50,000 people. So it was a major, if true,
A natural cavern or natural cave system used for preservation of their goods or protection.
Yeah, it was partially natural, but obviously some of the the tunnels were carved. uh, by humans, and the extent of these artifacts. Some say that the artifacts were Egyptian and or Tibetan. So these are definitely ooparts or out of place artifacts, that
Hey,
shouldn't have been there.
hey, if they were
And
coming from a flood or they wanted to protect or salvage some of their civilization, like, what better place to put it in a cave system high
well,
above?
yeah, the Hopi have this tradition of going down into caves during the destruction of the first world by fire, some kind of asteroid strike or comet, and the second world by ice. A pole shift that causes an ice age or something. And the Hopi have these traditions of going down into these caverns
Is this a
to
Sapapu tradition?
the Sipapu or Sipapuni is very close to this region where the cave is supposedly located. I went with a group in May of 2012, and we went up on the rim of Grand Canyon, right above where this cave is supposedly located. Okay, and unfortunately, the cave, it's a straight drop down to where the cave is. So you'd have to rappel down, using a winch and rope, and you'd have to rappel down the side of this vertical cliff.
But you
That
couldn't
just,
go. But you couldn't go sideways, so you need to know exactly where the cave is too.
yeah, well, this article pinpoints the location fairly specifically because it says that the cave is 42 miles upstream from the mouth of Crystal Creek, which is, if you've ever been to Grand Canyon, it's around the vicinity of the main village in Grand Canyon, a little bit northwest of there. But he said that Kincaid said it's 42 miles from this spot, the mouth of Crystal Creek. And I mapped this out on Google Earth and went 42 miles, and I have it pretty much pinpointed within a mile of where this cave might be.
Would helicopters not be able to find it, Gary?
Well, it's such rugged terrain, and there are so many different little inlets in the helicopters go down there all the time.
Needle
Tourist
in a haystack.
helicopters.
Needle in a haystack, I suppose, when you're
Yeah,
when you're,
exactly.
when you're looking from a helicopter.
It's just like a labyrinth
Mm.
of different caves and different geological formations. It's just it would be very hard to find, and it's in such formidable terrain that you'd have to be an expert rock climber to rappel down the side. Like I said, we went a group of us, including David Childress and Chris O'Brien and some others. We went, to the spot right above it, and we also found a kind of a megalithic site right above it, within a mile or so of this. And I have pictures of this in my book. This stone circle with a number of huge blocks that are piled one on top of the other, and it's really out in the middle of nowhere. We were there for about 4 days, and we only saw three other people. A grandfather and grandmother and their granddaughter herding sheep. Navajo. So, it's on Navajo land that we were at. And we found this huge megalithic stone circle, which I couldn't explain it. There's some theories that it might be like a sheepfold to keep sheep in, but that certainly wouldn't keep the coyotes from jumping over these stone blocks and getting the sheep.
Are you thinking like in terms of the megalithic civilization of over here, Western Europe, Ireland?
Well, it's kind of crude compared to some of the megaliths over there, but these obviously were multi-ton blocks that they, for some reason, you
Similar
know,
format.
uh, they pile them one on top of the other.
Mm. Are you
And
familiar with Newgrange, Gary?
yeah, I've read about it, and the the various passageways, the solstice alignments, and it's all very interesting.
Sure. Well, I just because you have the spiral here in the Chaco Canyon is something I researched. I wrote a book on Newgrange myself on this, on not a very big book. It's just a collection of cosmology, but
Hmm.
no, I don't really mention it. But it looks almost identical to Newgrange rock art. This Chaco Canyon spiral showing the sun dagger and the solstice.
Oh yeah, yeah. The spiral is pretty unique. I found a similar site closer to where I'm at, kind of a sun dagger, and there are a lot of these sun dagger kind of things where a little sliver of light comes into the center of the spiral on the summer solstice. In my first book, I have pictures of one that I found and a star map that corresponds to the various constellations in the Hopi cosmology. But yeah, yeah, it's very similar. The spiral is
There's talk of a Newgrange type place on the eastern coast of America. I had Scott Walter on the show. He was on the History Channel too, America Unearthed, and he's
sure.
talking about what they call the American Newgrange. It's up in I forget where it's at now.
New Hampshire, I
New
think.
Hampshire area. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There are a lot of spiral all over the Southwest, as they say, and back in the eastern part of the U.S. There are these spirals, and really they're all over the world. Um, I have a chapter in one of my books about the spiral and the universality of it, but it has to do with like at Newgrange, the solstice alignments, and the
Same ideology, if you want to call it, the same kind of astrotheology, ideology, mythology, the same stories at play. I think, Gary.
exactly, yeah, and this might be the result of a world culture in very ancient times that shared this knowledge with each other, a world civilization that sort of got wiped out by the ice age, but these traditions still persist in various forms and different continents.
Sure. Tell me about these canals, Gary, because we don't necessarily associate water with the the American Southwest,
Yeah, that's another fascinating subject that not too many people know about.
No, well, I hadn't been
Uh,
aware, Gary, till I read your book, Starshine.
and it's right. These canals are right where Phoenix, Arizona is located. In fact, the city of Phoenix took some of these canals and converted it to their modern water system.
Wow.
So they're still using a technology that was created over 1,000 years ago. And the group that created them are called the Hohokam, and they lived contemporaneous with the Hopi. The Hopi lived in northern Arizona, and the Hohokam lived in the Phoenix Basin in central Arizona, in what's called the low desert. The Hopi are in the high desert, but these Hohokam built these huge canals, a system of canals. Something like 500 miles of these canals, and the major canals were huge. A lot of work went into building them and digging these canals, which they found canals like 75 feet across and 12 feet deep. Some of these major ones, and to imagine moving that amount of earth and stone, with baskets on their back. They didn't have.
Assuming primitive materials and
Oh yeah, yeah. They didn't have the wheel, of course.
yeah.
So they moved all this stone and dirt on their backs in these woven baskets,
Hmm.
and it's just an amazing feat. It's been compared with these canals have been compared with the building of the Great Pyramids. They're so monumental, and very few people know about them. And also these Hohokam people also build flat top pyramids, or they call them platform mounds, and they built villages, these adobe villages on top of these mounds. And you can, if you ever go to Phoenix, I strongly suggested going to a place called Pueblo Grande. It's right adjacent to the Phoenix airport. It's within, you can see the planes coming in fact. And it's an ancient Hohokam site on top of this huge platform mound that's larger than a football field, and it's like 15 feet high and larger than a football field. And they, on top of this, they built this huge village. It's just an amazing. It boggles the mind that these people, went to all this work to build this canal system in order to grow corn, corn, beans, and squash.
Sure.
And
Build a picture for us, Gary, because we're talking star shrines over a vast terrain, aren't we? And these canals. I mean, what's the terrain we're covering here? Like, it must be miles, like.
well, yeah, this is a huge correlation, star correlation that I stumbled onto. It's the Hopi mesas themselves are about 7 miles apart. So if you think of the three Hopi mesas being the belt stars of Orion, that kind of dwarfs the complex at Giza.
Sure.
Yeah, because you have a 20-mile complex of three stars, three belt stars.
These guys are thinking on a grand scale then, Gary. That's quite a sophisticated mapping or ground plan to lay out.
Yeah, and I also discovered that there were different solstice alignments to the different the way that various villages were aligned. For instance, there's one village, it's called Oribe. It's on Third Mesa, and it's the oldest continuously inhabited village in the North American continent. But if you look to the southwest, there's a village called Wupatki, about 60 miles away to the southwest. And this forms a winter solstice sunset line between these two villages of Oribe and Wupatki. And it also aligns with the San Francisco Peaks, which is the highest point in Arizona, and as I mentioned before, the home of the Kachinas. So there's also this solar aspect of or solar alignments between these various villages. And so the Hopi were not only star watchers, but they were sun watchers, and they used the place where the sun rose on the horizon as a sort of calendar. And of course, the sun rises at a different spot on the horizon through the course of the year. And this is the way that they would, gauge their agricultural calendar. So, these solstice alignments were very important to their survival as a people, practically.
Sure. I get the impression of an Indiana Jones type personality here, Gary, with yourself. So,
Well, I don't wear a fedora.
I mean, just in terms of the terrain, I mean, it's quite a vast, complex task to take on. Because even in archaeoastronomy, some people just take one monument and they'll do a little bit of archaeoastronomy. They'll plug the data into the program, the astronomy program, and they'll have a look at alignments. But I mean, you've took on quite a few different complexes here to put the bigger picture together, Gary.
Well, this template, it was huge that I stumbled on. It encompasses Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and it goes over into Grand Canyon. The left arm of Orion reaches over to the Grand Canyon and some of the stars that rest inside the Grand Canyon, which is the place of emergence of the Hopi. It's just a vast template that the Hopi somehow, formulated. Mm-hmm. And there are different theories about how they did this. Mm-hmm. Like I said before, they had this.
Do you think they had longitude, Gary?
There's a theory that a fairly maverick archaeologist has come up with, and Chaco Canyon is on a longitude line that includes a number of different sites in the southwest and going down into Mexico. And they're exactly on this longitude line. He calls it the Chaco Meridian. The archaeologist named Stephen Lexon, came up with this idea of the Chaco Meridian. They built, the ancient people built the Chaco Canyon, and then they built a couple sites north on the same meridian, and then a site called Casas Grandes in Mexico is on the same meridian. So I think they were cognizant of this, the idea of a meridian, and a longitude line that they,
I
of
just
course,
think,
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
no,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the legends of them also coming from the sea, or maybe having this ancestral migration route from, the coast or the sea, and that longitude would probably be somewhat essential for that as well, being at sea.
Oh yeah, yeah. And yeah, latitude also, some of the Pacific sailors had what they called star pillars, stars that are directly overhead, and if they sailed east or west and kept this star basically overhead, various stars, according to the latitude, if they kept as one star overhead, they could assume that they were at about the same latitude. So both latitude and longitude was important.
Yeah, I know, and that's the thing. I mean, the latitude's easy to figure out, but the longitude's more difficult because, I mean, we didn't invent longitude in the Western world till the 1820s when the British Crown, they laid down a big fat sum of £20,000 back in those days just to figure out longitude. So
Oh yeah, and there was a big fight between Paris and the UK, London.
UK's always fighting about Paris, guys. They don't like each other.
Well, I really think that the original longitude line was the Giza prime meridian, because Giza is at what, 31 degrees longitude east, and I think this was actually the 0 degrees, it was the prime meridian at the time, because a lot of different sites in Africa line up with this meridian. Nabta Playa, south of Giza, this astronomical observatory, one of the oldest in the world, is on this meridian. The Great Zimbabwe stone, it's the largest stone structure south of the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, and this is right on this longitude line, the same longitude line.
That was on the 1970s documentary with Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, the movie version of the book.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's been in the consciousness of modern consciousness for quite a while, but this is on this line, and I went to South Africa in 2009 and found another couple sites that are on this particular line, the rock art sites.
Are you familiar
And
with Michael Tellinger?
oh yeah, I know his work pretty well. And Adam's calendar
Yeah, because
is also on this same longitude line.
he's into archaeoastronomy as well. So
Sure, yeah.
yeah, that's one thing, and there's nobody knows about that Zimbabwe ruin. There's nobody knows who built there or why it's there. It's a mystery, not.
Well, a lot of people uh, think that, well, there are different camps. Some believe that the Shona people, the Shona tribe, the black Africans, totally built it in the medieval times, like 1300, 1100, something like that. But other people believe that it was built by Phoenicians. In fact, a Sangoma or shaman named Credo Mutwa from South Africa, he's a Zulu shaman. He claims that the Phoenicians built this complex of Great Zimbabwe. This is a black African, Credo Mutwa, saying that the Phoenicians built it thousands of years ago.
No, they got around the Phoenicians, didn't they? There's links probably with the New World as well.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. They might have traveled. The Egyptians with the help of the Phoenicians, might have come over here.
I think so. And here's the thing, tying it back in with the book again, Gary, because you go into this ancestral, maybe sea voyages that I think ancient transoceanic contact is a definite, this 3000 BC wall that we meet, I think it's far more interesting time than people give it, and I think this transoceanic contact from, I think, various cultures that were going around the globe, they're not all secluded in pockets of civilization as we think.
No, that's the dogma that mainstream archaeologists like to persist in perpetrating or perpetuating, that the Native Americans kind of walked their way across the land bridge from Siberia, and that would have been the hard way to do it, because you're fighting glaciers,
Mm.
and you'd have to cross rivers that flowed into the ocean all the time, and that's simply the hardest way to do it. And maybe some might have done this, but we found sites in South America, Monteverde and so forth, that are 16,000 years old, and people were down in South America.
Yeah.
And this is the time that supposedly they were just crossing over the land bridge. So it just doesn't make sense that
I don't
they're.
think the land bridge washes anymore, and in anybody with has a bit of sense, like I don't.
Yeah, but I think in academia, the mainstream academia still tries to hold on to this idea that the bulk of Native Americans crossed over on this bridge, this land bridge, before the ice melted. But it's there's a lot of evidence to suggest that navigation took place in very early times across the Pacific, and also across the Atlantic, to the east coast of North America.
Gary, you talk in the book about the lost empire of Aztlan. I think that's how you pronounce it. Are we talking about Atlantis here, or Aztlan? Was that a very?
Well, some people say that it was Atlantis. I had a friend that claimed that this was indeed Atlantis, but Aztlan is it's a term that basically means place of the heron. The heron was the symbol of Aztlan. Okay.
Mhm.
And it was just a basic culture that lived in northern Mexico, during the age when the Spanish were coming onto the continent and interacting with the Native Americans. And there's a special culture called the Aztlanians that lived in Sinaloa, Mexico, and that region. And they've done some research, and a lot of pottery has been. And I show some examples of the pottery in the book. And this is also along that meridian line that connects Aztlan with Casas Grandes, with a place called Mimbres settlements in southern New Mexico, and also Chaco Canyon. All along this meridian line, there seems to be these cultures strung out along this particular longitude line.
Mhm. These guys are associated as with the Ant people. Tell us about the Ant people link, because I think the Dogon as well. They talk about the Ant people as well.
Yeah, the Ant people helped the Hopi. This is some of the myths of the survival of the Hopi people after two different cataclysms. As I mentioned before, we've lived in four different worlds. The first world was destroyed by fire, a kind of maybe a cometary impact, or asteroid impact. It connected with fire, destruction of the earth by fire. And the Ant people took the Hopi down into these caverns and taught them how to sprout beans. That's one of the main food sources for the Hopi is the bean. And the Ant people supposedly helped the Hopi and taught the Hopi how to sprout these beans inside the caves, inside the caverns. And today, the Hopi have a bean dance or bean ceremony in February that commemorates this time when the Ant people helped the Hopi survive in these subterranean caverns.
Mm.
The second world was destroyed by ice. Okay, an ice age, a pole shift, something like that. And again, the Ant people took the Hopi down into these caverns to help them, get past this destruction of the world. So the Ant people helped the Hopi survive two different times. Apparently, the Hopi were on their own for the destruction of the third world, which was by flood. The Ant people didn't play a part in that, but the Ant people did, help the Hopi survive.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And these guys have an oral culture. We don't really understand oral cultures today in terms of Western, and people always say, that this oral culture can get mixed up and all. But I know from my study of the Dogon, Gary, these guys have checks in their story. They can't corrupt their own story because there's so many checkpoints in it, especially with the Dogon anyway. But again, the Hopi and the Pueblo, they have an oral culture, Gary. Is that correct?
Oh, sure, yeah, and it's not written like the Maya. The Maya had a writing system,
Yeah.
but the Hopi have the oral tradition. And as you say, James, there are a lot of different checks about how to tell the story properly and how to transmit the myth. And the Hopi in times past used to spend a lot of the winter months down in kivas
Mm.
talking about these myths and talking to the young people about these myths and the right way to transmit. And, there'd be arguments about the right way you know, to transmit the story. Maybe something was left out or something put in that was not supposed to be put in. So as you say, there's a lot of checks. It's not just you can say anything and anything will fly.
Yeah.
It's a it's a tradition that is very rigorous,
Mm.
and the people because they knew that they were transmitting this sacred knowledge. It wasn't just merely fairy tales that they were talking about. They were
Sure.
talking about the history of the people, and they wanted to get it right for the younger generation.
Yeah, it's significant to point that out, Gary, because that's what some people just go, well, oral is just talking. It's not the same thing. I mean,
Well, we have the idea that myth means, in our culture, a myth is an untruth, something that's not true.
mm,
And, mythology is the main part of the Hopi and the Dogon,
yeah,
and both cultures also have symbols. It's not a written language per se,
yeah, symbology more so.
but there are a number of symbols. I've recently tried to get into the pale fox about the Dogon culture, and just the symbology there is just amazing.
Complex too, Gary. Complex.
Very complex, and it's a form of writing. Really, all these symbols, is a form of writing. It's an ideogram or ideographic kind of transmission of knowledge.
Hmm. Of
You
course, the
know.
Dogon are synonymous with star ancestors too, and I suppose I just is the big question for you, Gary. How does this change your philosophy as an author, a researcher of star ancestors, and not a question of whether you believe or not. I mean, it's a question of how has your philosophy changed, or did you get shocked when you kind of discovered this ancestry of star ancestry in the Native American tradition, or?
Well, like I say, I was introduced through the Lakota to this concept, and it seemed to hold true for the Hopi as well, having these star contacts, these star ancestors, and it's the same for, I have a Zuni friend that says the same thing. Zuni is another Pueblo tribe in the New Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, all the Kachinas are basically star ancestors
Mm.
that they come from the skies, and we receive our knowledge from these celestial beings, and that's kind of a given in that culture. And a lot of people kind of roll their eyes at ancient aliens. Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
but
don't think it's a taboo subject anymore, Gary.
it's not. But I think as presented,
We're
but
not there yet. We're not there yet, but I don't think it's taboo anymore.
yeah, I'm not sure that it's as physical as some, it's not necessarily nuts and bolts craft, traversing the galaxy and coming to Earth. It might be interdimensional, and it might be, time travelers, something along those lines that the Hopi and the Dogon are reporting.
I know one thing, Gary, from my own academia, because I'm done physics and engineering. We don't know everything about physics. We don't. We're only scratching the surface. We're not
No, it's
as advanced
yeah.
as we think we are. We're not.
Well, we're starting to get there with quantum theory and the string theory and so forth.
But even the philosophy of all that in itself is just mind bending.
Oh yeah, yeah, and an author, Laird Scranton, has done a lot of work with the Dogon relating to the string theory and so forth, and they seem to have had an intuitive knowledge of modern physics, astrophysics.
I love Laird's work. I had Laird on the show talking about it, and
Oh
he
yeah,
wrote a book review for me as well. Very kind man and very knowledgeable, and
yeah,
very prolific in his research, Gary.
yeah. He's a nice guy. I met him a few years ago,
Mm.
and very nice man.
I hope to get him back on the show. He's got a new book coming out next year too, Gary, on links with the Dogon and Buddhism and stuff like that, and stupas and stuff.
Sure, China and
Yeah, so mythology and history and ancient cultures was never so much alive now, Gary, was it? It's never been so alive as it is now.
Well, I think there's an awakening that the idea of the old paradigm is falling away, and like I say, for instance, the land bridge theory is really starting to crumble. The bridge is falling apart, and I don't think scientists can really claim that too much longer. And these new paradigms of global navigation in early times, I think,
The
are
Columbus
going.
tradition again, the Columbus discovering America, that was like, that's,
Yeah, I think it was the last one to
yeah,
get here.
that was, yeah, I think he was the last as well. I mean, it was a bit ludicrous to think that. But it shows how it's human traits too, Gary. This is what humans do. They try to oversimplify sometimes, and the world has proven us time and time again that things are a lot more complex than we would like them to be. Like,
Yeah, I think probably the next area of research will be genetics to prove that different people traveled around the globe, and you can prove this genetically. Certain DNA traces found all over the globe will kind of nail this idea of diffusionism as opposed to isolationism, which it has been the main theory up till now. The isolationists
sure.
that the Native Americans were just these scattered bands kind of surviving on their own in North America after they made it across from Siberia. But this is obviously not the case.
Well, Gary, I love archaeoastronomy and I love what you do. The book is absolutely awesome, and you know what? It's actually refreshing because it's done in a very good way. And you've really done your homework. And I've heard you doing a couple of shows, and you talk about spending so many years writing this book and so many years of research, and you can understand why. Because when you read the book, it wasn't wrote in a weekend. It's like prolific, and you can tell somebody put years into this. Like so.
Well, thank you, James. It's been a long process, but it's built upon itself, and I keep getting new insights all the time.
Sure, sure. Well, give us your website, Gary, yourself, and tell us if you have
Okay.
any conferences coming up or any shows or.
Not now. I've been kind of taking it easy as far as interviews go, but the website is theorionzone.com. That's THEORION zone.com. And there are a lot of free articles you can download there, and there are links to all the 4 books in the series.
Yeah.
And you can get them various places, Barnes and Noble or Amazon, and They're published by Adventures Unlimited Press, so you can get them there too. So you can
Sure. And
find them pretty much.
I'll have a clickable link on your biography page on capricornradio.com too.
Great, thanks.
But yeah, I mean, and I should say your articles, they've been in Atlantis Rising magazine, Fate, Four Corners, Eric Von Daniken's Legendary Times, Ancient American, World Explorer, and UFO magazines. You know, you've been published several places, Gary. You know.
Well, I recently had an article on South Africa in the Graham Hancock Reader.
Yeah.
I've had a couple articles published by the Graham Hancock Reader, and you can also get these. Let's see, one of them is called "The Lost Knowledge of the Ancients" and "The Mysteries of the Ancient Past." So the two Graham Hancock Readers, with a lot of good, got a lot of good research by others in those two books. So.
Sure. I loved your website too, Gary. It's got a good resource there as well, and that's what I like to see when you go to a website. Some people, they make a bit more out of it that if they can, they put resources there rather than just a public page. Like, so that was good to see that too, Gary.
Well, it's been up there for a dozen years or so online, so I've kind of built and tried to provide some free downloadable articles.
Sure.
For people.
Again, that's always more. Well, Gary, it's been a pleasure having you. It really has, and I've definitely come away more enlightened and feel I've gained a bit more insight into the Native American tradition because it's one of my favorite subjects at the moment to research. But I really thank you for your book, and I thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you, James. The time flew by, and I had a very good time chatting with you. They all had correspondence in spots in the Black Hills. So this idea of as above, so below was very obvious in the Lakota cosmology. And this is the first time I had come across this idea that, that the Earth or the conception of a cosmology on the Earth would mirror the stars. So, it got me thinking about this heaven's mirror or the reflection of these spots on the Earth and in the heavens, on Earth as it is in heaven. As
above, so below, as they say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so when I got to Arizona, I've lived in Arizona for over 18 years. And I started going to some of these Kachina dances. The Kachinas are messenger spirits. They're intermediaries between the realm of the humans and the realm of the gods. And the Hopi still have these Kachina dances every year. They're kind of winding up for the season right now. They're having the last of the dances in July, and then they'll ease off, and the Kachinas will go back to their home, which is the San Francisco Peaks, and wait until after the winter solstice, and then the Kachinas will come back to the Hopi Mesas.
Major part of their culture, this, Gary, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's the Kachinas have been with them for thousands of years. And if you've seen Kachina dolls, some of your listeners might be familiar with the Kachina dolls that the Hopi carve. Originally, these were carved not to sell to tourists, which they do today, but to instruct the children about all these various spirits that come to them, because there are so many different types of Kachinas. And, some of it's a mask dance that they perform in the village plaza usually, and they dance for hours and hours in the hot sun. These
strange masks as well, Gary.
Oh yeah. It's hard to describe because they're so varied, the types of masks. Some of them even look like space helmets.
It kind of reminds me of the Dogon sometimes and their strange masks.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of similarities between the Dogon and the Hopi, it's quite amazing these masked dances that both of these tribes or ethnic groups perform. And they're obviously spirits that help the Hopi. These Kachinas are benevolent spirits, and they help with the agricultural cycle. They come right after the winter solstice and stay through the sowing season and into they stay through July, as I said, and then they go back to the San Francisco Peaks, which are the highest mountains in Arizona, and they stay there for the rest of the year until the cycle renews itself, and they go back to help the Hopi.
So it's not even
But
just a celebration of summer solstice, winter solstice, or solstitial events. It's actually a migratory route as well.
oh yeah, it's a cyclic migration of these spirits
Mm.
that come and help them for a while on the mesas. Well, the mesas are about 60, 75 miles to the northeast of the San Francisco Peaks.
Hmm.
I started going when I first came here into Arizona. I started going to these kachina dances, and they're so powerful because the Hopi live in these adobe villages, these stone and mud villages, and they've been in this region for well over 1,000 years. The oldest continuously inhabited community
Wow.
in the U.S. It was established about 1100 A.D.
Do you ever wonder, Gary, how far they go back? Do you think they go back to like 3000 BC, but we only have record of the last 1000?
Well, the Hopi made a number of migrations through the years, and before they came to this center place, which they're located now in Arizona, in northern Arizona, they made these tremendous migrations. And some believe that they went down into the Maya territory
Mm.
in the Yucatan, and there are tales of them going east to the Atlantic Ocean, and some of the myths involve the snake climber. Thanks, James. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you, Gary. And this has got. I'm quite fascinated with the Native American traditions and cultures, and I'm also fascinated with archaeoastronomy, Gary. So
Mm.
I've got it all wrapped up in one today. And I've also had Nancy Redstar from Ancient Aliens on as well. So
Mm.
we did one show there not too long ago. But so this is fascinating subject, Gary. How did you get, I guess, drawn into this, suckered into this, or?
Yeah, we have to go back quite a ways, maybe more than I'd like to admit, but maybe 25 years before I lived in Arizona, I lived in South Dakota, and I was working with the Lakota Sioux, and I met a woman named Charlotte Black Elk, and Charlotte was the great granddaughter of the famous Nicholas Black Elk, who wrote Black Elk Speaks, a Native American classic. And at the time, she was talking about this star map that she had on a buffalo hide, and she was relating it to various points in the Black Hills. The Black Hills are the kind of the center of the Lakota Sioux world or cosmology. And she said that various stars, various constellations corresponded to certain spots in the Black Hills. And the Lakota used to make annual migrations around the Black Hills and performing a specific ceremony at each spot in the during the year, and at each very specific spots and specific times that these rituals were performed, and they all corresponded to celestial objects, Orion's belt, Sirius, the Pleiades, the reflection of the celestial onto the earth was almost perfect. There was a perfect match between the stars of Orion and the pattern of villages on the Arizona desert. And this just really, just floored me. It just blew me away, so to speak. And I started, going to these various sites and researching the sites. And, that was back in 1997. And, I've been going ever since with this theory. And each one of my books kind of builds on the other and presents different aspects of this basic correlation between the stars and the villages, the Hopi villages of.
Sure.
Uh,
Have you ever heard of Thornborough Henge in the UK, Gary?
oh, sure, yeah.
It kind of synchronizes with that in my mind for a.
Yeah, in fact, right now I'm working on an ebook that kind of looks at all the Orion correlations that I could find on the globe, and one of these is Thornborough, which happens to be on the same meridian as Avebury and Silbury Hill and Stonehenge. If you look, it's the same longitude line that all these sites are located. And Lindisfarne is on that line as well. And
Yeah, there's so many across the world, Gary, isn't there?
yeah, there's one in Mexico, Teotihuacan, in north of Mexico City, which is a pretty direct correlation to Orion's belt. And I found an Orion correlation in Nigeria, believe it or not. And there's some in South Africa, some Orion correlations in South Africa. And they're basically all over the planet. And ancient cultures seem to have focused on this particular constellation, as well as Sirius and the Pleiades. Sirius was also an important star for the Hopi. The Hopi call Sirius Ponatsona, which means sucks from the belly, which indicates a mammal of some sort. It's not a dog as we think of the dog star, but it is a mammal that the Hopi are talking about, and the lion, which supposedly constructed Serpent Mound in southern Ohio. And they went up into Canada, into the far north, and they found snake clan petroglyphs in Alberta, Canada. So, so these people, before they established themselves on these three primary mesas in Arizona, they made this, centuries-long period of migrations and kind of circumambulating this, across the continent. And and then they finally came to the center point, the axis mundi, or the center of the world, the center of the Hopi cosmology, and that's where they settled, and they're still there after over 1,000 years.
So Gary, let's talk about Orion, because these star shrines are in the shape of Orion, and you mentioned Robert Bauval. I have Robert Bauval coming on this Saturday, so it's quite
great.
Yeah,
No.
I've been looking for getting Robert on for a while now, so I'm looking forward to that. And of course, many people will be familiar with Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory with the Giza pyramids. So, but here we have again, Gary, that you seem to have mapped out here, that this Orion, as above, so below, is mapped out again. Perhaps maybe explain that, Gary.
Sure. Yeah, Robert Bauval's work was instrumental in my theory of the Arizona Orion correlation. And as I said, I was going up to one of these Kachina dances, and I was driving toward the Hopi Mesas, and I had just read Robert Bauval's book, The Orion Mystery, which correlates the three major pyramids on the Giza Plateau to the belt stars of Orion. And there are three primary mesas on that the Hopi live on, first, second, and third mesa. And I was just kind of idly gazing off into the distance as I approached them. I thought, well, maybe there's an Orion correlation right here in Arizona. And I put that in the back of my mind and went to see the dances and experience the dances. And then when I got home, I got out a map of Arizona and I got out a star chart, and I realized there was a direct correlation between the villages that the Hopi had constructed and every major star in the constellation Orion. And the